Okay, so how many of you are elected for a year at a time? How many of you are elected for 2 years? 3 years?
3 years.
How many of you didn't raise your hand before? How many years are you all elected for? 1.
I do it every year, just so that my mom.
Right. The point of this,
So I find somebody to replace you.
see, that's unfair because it means you have to feel like you have to stay forever unless they come up with somebody. And so the urge is the current session should be electing you, and they should be electing you because first of all, you want them to want to work with you, and they should be electing you for a period of time so that you don't actually in there to be elected. You may be currently serving on the session. You do not need to be currently serving on the session. All right? If you are not on the session can choose to give you the privilege of speaking, but you may not vote. All right? I say the session can choose to give you the privilege of speaking. When it's time for your report, they must give you the privilege of speaking. But for the rest of the meeting, you may or may not speak, depending on what the session decides. So you should be clear with that at the very beginning. Most sessions are not going to be so strict that they're going to care if you speak, if you have something to contribute. But some will. And so you should be clear at the very, very beginning whether or not you can speak if you're not currently on the session. So there's no guarantee if you came on to the session and you started as clerk of session, when your term is up on the session, can you still be clerk? Yes, you can. All right? You can go off for a year and go back on the session. You can go off for 15 years but still be clerk and be on the session as the clerk. What should you know? You should have knowledge of the session's responsibilities, the Presbyterian polity and the Book of Order, basic parliamentary procedures, a clear ability to take good minutes, and we're going to work on some of these today, so don't be intimidated, the ability to send and receive communications on behalf of the session. When the session makes a decision, it's not fair to look to the pastor and say, will you write that up and send that letter out to somebody? It's technically your job as clerk of session. All right. Now you can decide with the pastor, well, the letter might be better coming from the pastor depending on the situation. But you can't automatically foist that onto the pastor. It's the clerk's responsibility. And you need to know how to assist the pastor in matters related to the session. So those are just a few of your responsibilities as clerk of session. And if you look at your handbook on page 2, you will see a list of responsibilities. I'm going to go through those in more detail now, and I'm going to try to divide them in a way that's a little different from your handbook, which is to divide them into regular monthly responsibilities. If your session meets monthly, this is monthly. If your session meets quarterly, let's say, this would be your regular quarterly types of responsibilities. So we will look at regular responsibilities and then annual responsibilities and so forth along the way. But among the regular responsibilities that you have as the clerk of session is to send out meeting notices. How can you send out meeting notices? You can mail them out through snail mail. You can email them out. All right? Whichever works for your congregation. But they must be sent out in such a way that everybody in your congregation gets the notice. So if you have somebody in your congregation that doesn't have regular email, and we still have some congregations where that's the case, you can't email out a notice, just hope that person finds out somehow. You then have to either snail mail them a notice, or call them and say, I've emailed everybody else, but I'm calling you to tell you that we have a meeting coming up. Billy's on.
Are you saying I have to notify everybody in the congregation?
Nope, the session. The session.
That's what?
You must remind the session. So you can't just, let's say your session meets on the first Tuesday of the month. You can't just hope everybody shows up on the first Tuesday of the month. Part of your obligation is to send out, even if it's a regular, every first Tuesday of the month, part of your obligation is to send out an email. I'm reminding you that we're meeting on the first Tuesday of the month. And hopefully, if you're really organized, you'll send it out maybe with the docket ahead of time or the minutes from the last meeting. But you must send out something that says that you are meeting, all right, on a regular basis. You are to contact committee moderators about the business that goes on into the meeting. It's your obligation to make sure the docket works well. You will normally do that with the pastor who is moderating the meeting, but it's your obligation. So who needs to know whether a committee is going to be reporting or not and whether they've done what they've done? They said they do. You do. Pastor ideally will as well, but you do. That falls to you. Right? In our system, we have parity between teaching elders or ministers and ruling elders. And the parity here is the moderator is the minister, right? Or the commission ruling elder. The clerk is the balance to that in these meetings. And they're to be partners, equal partners in these meetings in that way. So you're the one that comes in making sure that the business is ready for the session meeting. All right? You ask ahead of time, this is to help you, for any recommendations that committees are making in writing. So that you don't, let me get that wording again. Can I get, the committees should come in ahead of time with when you come into the meeting, oh, you think you're going to ask for a motion? Bring it to me in writing. Hand it to me when you come in.
Susan, this is so nice and clear. Can we get a copy of this?
This will be put up with the video when the videos go on the website.
So this will be a doc?
Yes, it will be. It actually, I think it depends which way they edit it, but I think they'll actually edit it right into the presentation, and then there'll be a document, a PowerPoint as well, that you can click on the PowerPoint and watch while you're watching the video.
Thank you.
All right. So you should ask for those recommendations in writing. The wording matters. You'll have them in front of you that way. Then all you have to worry about is if people make changes to the recommendations. Yeah?
Does a committee report become part of the minutes?
Could a committee report?
Does a committee report, so there's a music committee and they make a report, does that become part of the minutes?
We're going to talk more about what specifically goes into minutes, but the answer will be motions will from the committee, and if there's general characterization, yes. Detail, no. You can put it as an appendix. One of the things that, for instance, in the presbytery, we get praised for every time we have our minutes read, and we do the same thing you do at the next level, is that Wendy does an amazing appendix for us, which has all of the important documents that are there. And every single time, the other presbyteries don't have as good a good appendix. And she really has it nicely organized. You can do it that way. If you have a written report from committees, they can go into your appendix. All right? You need to develop the meeting agenda with the moderator. How many of you have moderators that are not your pastor? One, two, there's several. That means that your obligation ahead of time, either because you're in between pastors or because you don't have a pastor and will not have a pastor, your obligation is to contact whoever's going to be that moderator ahead of time and say, this meeting is coming up. Here's what I know is on the agenda. Is there anything you need to add? And to work through those issues with the moderator so they know what to expect. You're the one that puts that agenda together. For those of you who have pastors, this probably means sitting down with the pastor and working through in more details. Here's what I know from the committees need to be on the agenda. This committee will probably need to take this amount of time because it's got a motion. This one's just reporting, etc. So that's you that sort of makes sure that if you have a meeting that goes from, say, 7 till 8:30 or whatever your meeting time is, it's your obligation to make sure you've spaced out that meeting so that you get through the material you need to get through in that meeting. Now, that's too short? Is that why several people laughed? 7 till 11?
You said 8:30, I went, no, 9:30.
Okay. I've been in session meetings where I've gone into moderator and we've been there till 11:30 at night. And clerks, if you do a really good job, you will get folks out on almost every night on time, right? Because you're planning. Once in a while things come up that get very, need a lot more time, but mostly you'll get people out on time. You need to also figure out, and this is a place where most sessions are not doing this well, what can go on a consent agenda. All right? What I mean by that is things that are regularly going to happen that nobody is going to object to can go onto a consent agenda. So, there were 50 people at communion last week, right? And we will have communion next week. Session will approve communion for next week. That's not going to need a huge amount of debate, right? Nobody is going to debate if you do communion on the first Sunday, but session is responsible for approving communions. So put it on a consent agenda. You come in with, here are the things that are not going to be, people are not going to debate, that we really don't need to talk about, that people are just going to be saying, let's move this, let's move this, let's move this. Put it on a consent agenda. It will save you time. It will allow you to put the focus of your session meeting together on items that really matter. All right? So you're the one to put that together after you've heard from different committees, the consent agenda items that are there. You also are going to be recording, obviously, the minutes from the various meetings, right, that you're sitting in. It's helpful to use a template. We will come back to this, but it's helpful to use a template that you start with room to take notes on, either if you're using paper or putting a template and typing right on them if you're using a laptop instead. Your minutes should be a full and accurate recording of the proceedings of the session. We will talk about what that means in a little while, but that's your responsibility. You're also the one responsible for keeping the roll of session membership and attendance, who's at the meeting. If you have policies around session attendance, you cannot miss more than 3 meetings in a year without excuse, or you're off the session. Who enforces that? You do. All right. So you just need to be aware of that, and you need to know as well, by the way, let me go back for a minute. You need to know as well what the quorum is for your session, so that you know whether you actually have the right number of people there to make a decision or not. All right.
How many times can they miss before they go?
It depends on your policy. Some congregations have a policy that says if you have not been at 3 session meetings in a year, you're off session, or if you've not been at 2, or it's really up to your individual congregation. It's a good policy to have, because if somebody has missed a year and a half and they're not participating, otherwise it's hard to say, we want to ask you to step down. But if it's like, here's our policy, and so, now may not be the time for you to serve because you're not able to make these meetings. It's much easier. Question?
Does it matter whether it's an excused absence?
Excuse, yes. If somebody obviously is in the hospital, for instance, it's not their fault that they're missing the session meeting, or if somebody in their family has died, or so yes, excused absences versus unexcused absences. You're looking for a policy that would be without an absence that people would, at the session, would consider to be acceptable.
Sometimes we have a member who's going through a very rough time, which we had, and we just kept excusing this person from not coming to session until somebody who spoke up and finally said, we need to contact them and see whether they're really interested in being on the
Right.
session anymore.
Right.
And they weren't, and then we weren't.
But it doesn't, people don't know how to step off when things come up either, and having a policy helps them find a way to step off. Gee, right now I need to care for my mother, and it's taking so much time that I can't be there, and so I know you say I can only miss two meetings, right? Could I please step off, and I'd love to come on at another time when this works. All right, so it really is advantageous to everybody to have that kind of policy. But you need to know what your policy is and what your quorum are for session meetings. That's an important thing for you to be aware of. Most of the session will not know that. Yeah?
So every church can have their own quorum, whatever they vote?
Yes, your bylaws should have what your quorum is in it. All right. If it does not, then your answer is a simple majority. But you should generally have in your own, because in some congregation where you're, and you should be looking, quite honestly, if you haven't recently looked at the size of your session, unless your congregation has grown by leaps and bounds, and I don't know very many Presbyterian churches in our presbytery where that's the case, your session may be too large as well. And so you should also think about examining that.
We have a session member who is in Florida half of the year, but she participates electronically.
And so the answer to that is we're going to get to that in a little while. Do your bylaws allow her to do that?
I have to look in.
And if they do, that's fine. If they don't, you've got a problem. And I'm going to urge you during the day today to make sure that your bylaws do allow for electronic policies of various kinds. But that will be a bylaw change if you don't have it in there. So The next thing, you are the one who brings all official correspondence to the session's attention, and then you respond as directed. And I do mean all. It may be things you think are completely worthless. I can't believe I'm going to read this letter from the denomination again. All right? I got something like this last year. But you need to bring it there. Whether the session wants to spend a lot of time on it may be up to your guidance. You may say, I got this letter, I want you to be aware of it. Unless somebody's interested, we can just pass it around and move on. But your obligation is when you get something addressed to Clerk of Session, or to you with the name Clerk of Session after it, you are obligated to bring it to the session. That can be, an ad for a full body scan. You know those things that are sent around that I've known in both my last two congregations, we kept getting them, come and have them at your church and we'll give you a discount of this. They can be that. You technically need to bring that. We got this another ad today for a full body scan. Put it to the side, but you must be reporting this. All right? So all correspondence that comes in, all official correspondence. What makes it official? It's addressed to you as Clerk of Session. All right, that makes it official. You need to keep a list of unfinished business. There are various ways to do this. Some people just automatically roll unfinished business onto the agenda for the next month. All right, that's one way to do it. You can keep a separate list, but things that people are saying we're going to visit again in a future meeting, that's your responsibility to make sure that it comes back in a future meeting. So you're the one that keeps that list of unfinished business. That can be whether it's business dealing with a committee, business dealing with a staff member who is later going to report to the session about something. The Christian Ed director said that this is going to happen and they'll let you know how it goes. Well, you need to make sure that the Christian Ed person is invited back to tell you how it goes or write something to tell you how it goes. So you keep track of those kinds of things. And I should say, you remind the appropriate person to report back expediently when they're supposed to be reporting back as well. And then in consultation with the moderator, I urge you to prepare a statement of the highlights of meetings. Any session actions, any reports that will matter to the congregation. All right? You can put it in your congregation's newsletter. You can put it as a separate insert in your bulletin. You can put it on a bulletin board. But sessions work best when they are transparent. Now, I am not telling you that you need to put all confidential matters. You've been talking about whether the pastor's educational plans are appropriate or not, right? And it's been a heated discussion. That doesn't need to go into the highlights, all right? Not confidential matters. But other things need to be out there because you are representing your congregation. And so you need to be making sure you get that material out to your congregation. All right? So in one way or another, it can be a weekly email that goes out, a monthly email, however you want to do it. But you should be making sure the session is aware of that. So those are things you do regularly.